Empowered Health, a podcast shedding light on how healing is an inside job. Keys to your inner power and total transformation. Discussing wholeness, wellness, and the effects of the mind on the physical and energetic parts of our being. A podcast to support you, moving from fear and pain into wellness and purpose. Belief, hope, connection, energetic keystones for transformation and inner power. Sacred knowledge that inspires us to look within, to find our own unique path. Empowered Health, release and rewire to become what you truly are, strong, whole, and empowered.
Welcome to the Empowered Health, Empowered Mind podcast, the keys to heart-aligned living for the conscious game changers with Dr. Jayne, ND. Today we have Natalia Rose, all the way from South Africa. Natalia graduated from the New York University and is the author of 8 books, including the Raw Food Detox Diet, Emotional Eating SOS, The New Energy Body, Forever Beautiful, and Natalia has been featured on NBC, Fox News, The View, and in publications such as the New York Times and USA Today. Founder and president of detoxtheworld.com. Welcome, Natalia.
Wow, Dr. Jayne, thank you. That lovely introduction. It's so wonderful to be with you again.
Thank you for coming. Natalia, let's delve deep into this topic of the matrix that you are so passionate about and that for years, I've been aware of, but now, we're putting our finger on it. And let's talk about some of the big subjects that were really affected by this, like our sexuality, our perception of our feminine self, how we even perceive success in the world. And, maybe we'll get into some hot topics like addictions, eating addictions, but just start and we'll take it where it goes.
Wow, it's a great question. I love that we're going to tackle this subject matter today. All right, so the most important thing to understand where comprehending the matrix is concerned is the word power. Power has come to be understood and defined in so many different ways. But the way I define power is it's literally the forces of life. It's the life force. It's the force from the source, the forces of goodness. It's the intelligence of the cosmos. So that which creates light, that comes from a force. There's a source behind that, the sun that we see in the sky. We're talking about the actual substance of life, okay? And that's filled with intelligence. It's brimming with intelligence. That is power. So we, as the expression of life, the beautiful human family, nature at large, is an embodiment, is designed to be an embodiment of that force, of that power. And what happens is, because there are forces that would like to possess that power, there's this construct that was created for them to do so. So where the powerful beings are born into the world, they're immediately seized upon by this construct. So this construct, I tend to call it the matrix. I find it's simple to stick with one term, a construct that desires to siphon off the power from the living beings that enter it. And upon entering it, these living beings become conditioned and programmed, coded by this matrix entity, again, whose desire it is to take that power. So they have to be clever in terms of how to do it. And they set us on a course whereby we consistently, with every moment of our lives, are directed to make choices that will decrease our power and make it easier for them to seize that power on us. And as we weaken, they have obviously more power. So it's like a giant bully that has no power of its own. So it needs to go and take power from others. And the issue, though, is that we are completely ignorant of it. We don't understand it. We don't see it happening to us because it happens to us when we're so young. So it's an issue. It's a battle of power. It's that which has no power of its own, and it knows it's going to die if it doesn't get power. So it seeks out our power, and then it creates. And this concept of creation, it's just really important to understand this, that because it can't do anything, it can't create any idea of its own. It has to take what already exists, because the power of true life is so much intelligence. It's so creative. Its very essence is intel and creativity. So it can only invert that. So it's manipulation tactic. It's what I would call anti-creative. A way of operating is it turns everything upside down, inside out. So through inversion, it has what would appear to be a creative power, but it's not. It's a destructive power. It's anti-creative, and it uses all of that. As complicated and weird as it sounds, that's why if we look around the world, we look at everything that and remember the world is the matrix. The world is not life. So you can be frustrated with the world. That makes a lot of sense. You're not frustrated with life. It's like life is great. Life has been inverted in the world, so it's confusing because you come in as this, as this human with and everything. It should, we know that it shouldn't feel this way, but it does. So we get all, confused and frustrated because of that. It's because of the world. The matrix and the world is synonymous, whereas life and source and God and the network of life and all these the creative force is all. They're also synonymous. So therein we have the landscape, let's say the zoo in many ways, if you want to think of it that way, because we're put in cages and we're used to do the will of the matrix.
True. And recently I've often thought, my goodness, we're actually treated like cattle, like we're a commodity. And
yes.
We need to break free from that. So
yeah.
what are some of the big programs we grow up with?
Well, I love it. I just want to talk about the word you just used, commodity, because in the matrix, in the world, everything is commoditized. Mm-hmm. So everything is transactional. Everything's commoditized. Everything is objectified, which means that we're taught from day one, the first lesson we get in matrix living is we are a thing, and we have a price tag, we have a value. But unlike the value we would feel if we were not subjected to this matrix, or the value we're given is a false value. Now, to understand the concept of codes, coding, you have light codes, which is true information, and you have the false codes come from the matrix, which is false information. So we are immediately, by even objectifying ourselves, by even the idea of commoditizing ourselves as a transactional being, we are automatically devaluing ourselves by 99.9%. So there goes everything right there. And then we start operating as a transactional tool. We start commoditizing everybody else. We commoditize nature. We exploit everything around us. Nothing is sacred. Everything is desecrated. And then we allow it to be done to ourselves too. We don't really acknowledge it that way. We don't think of it that way. In the same way that we don't think about dating, for example, is a transactional event, but it is. I mean, swipe left, swipe right. How is that any different to online shopping? It's the same thing. I click that. I'm going to like that. Maybe I want to purchase that later. Oh, that's the right size and shape, but I'm not sure I really like the color. Oh, that's a great color, but I'm not sure I like the size and shape. We are selling ourselves and selling out in so doing. So that first thing that you said is the most important thing to comprehend, because in that power dynamic, in that power battle, the first thing is the commoditization of self and other.
Yeah. And we were talking about how even though we're aware, we still, we're caught in bringing our own children up in this matrix. And, you know, I think back and I, you know, I have patients, moms that are like, we're so afraid our children won't look right, or they're not intelligent enough, or maybe they're covered in eczema, or they don't look the right way, you know, and the fear creeps in that they don't belong to the typical matrix or what we perceive to be the right look or feel. So it's like, it starts so young. And, you know, even our sexuality with, like you were talking about that, how we're brought up with Disney, you know, the way we should look and act and be in order to be accepted. Just talk to us more about that.
Okay. Well, first of all, the Disney stuff is really interesting because if you look at all the dark fairy tales and there's this absentee mother, and the mother is so key. And, you know, we have Matrix, Matrix, and I think of like Matrix and data. Data sounds like data, daddy and mama, Matrix and dad, Matrix and data. It gets a little bit creepy when you think of it that way, but you have this absentee mother. And I believe that if we want to get esoteric with it, it's the absence of that right brain activity. So the left brain in the matrix commoditization of self world, we are focused on left brain activity, which is all the analytical functioning, all these, you know, on paper exactly as is, versus the right hemisphere, which is all about poetry and art and expression and things that haven't ever, you know, been thought of or created because they're just, you know, they're not on paper, they're not of this world. It's the specialness, and that's the mother energy. Not one good or bad. It's just that they should be balanced, and they're not. And that's why when, you know, it's said that we only use, like, you know, some people say 3% of the brain, some people say 10, but whatever it is, it's insufficient. It's because that right brain is shut down, and it's shut down for a reason, because it's so full of magic. And the matrix knows if our right brain is switched on, we're going to have power. And if we have power, we're not going to give it over to them. We won't be that stupid. You know, we're going to have the intel. So that absentee mother is an important one to think about. And then, of course, you have the understanding that we're all of our programming, all our preferences, all our dark coding is done, light or dark, depending on how you're raised. But the matrix coding is done between 0 and 7 years old. And I love what Dr. Bruce Lipton, he did sort of all this amazing research about it long ago, but basically explaining that we are from 0 to 6 or 0 to 7 are in this hypnagogic state where we're just receiving information. And that would be great if we were receiving information as original peoples, you know, as aboriginals, as you know, as natives that were not affected by the colonialist or the matrix world. And we'd be receiving all this amazing stuff, and we'd be so brilliant with goodness by the time we were 6 or 7 years old. But instead, we're filled. Like, imagine, I like to always think about sovereignty, because sovereignty and power are, of course, completely interconnected. So sovereignty is about rulership in the kingdom and autonomy and authority. And I love that AU, authority, autonomy, authorship, that's also the symbol for gold, which is an incorruptible noble metal. So it does all connect, and there's a lot of detail in the English language, a lot of spell casting. Of course, we spell and we write sentences. We get sentenced by writing sentences, because with this programming, language actually continuously reprograms us in a way that's not helpful. But there's lots of little secrets in the language too. So the autonomy factor with the sovereignty, you can think of it as you having a kingdom. So think of it in terms of you having this kingdom, and imagine you have this gorgeous castle. So this is your birth. You're born with this gorgeous castle, 0 to 6 years old. You would be either filling the castle with gold, with light, with all manner of the most magical, functional things that would make your castle, your kingdom so strong, or a whole team comes in every day and puts garbage in your castle. Okay, that's the matrix. That's matrix programming. It's garbage in your castle. How can you be sovereign? You're the stench in the castle, the rotting of the walls. This means that you're going to be overtaken so easily. So, so we need to recognize that our castles, our kingdom has been filled with rubbish, and go about the business of getting that rubbish out by acknowledging it, seeing it, smelling it, and finding a place for it. That, give it to the earth. Find a way, something that can receive it and burn it. Burning it is really, really good. Burning it in the sun is brilliant, by the way. When I do my daily practice in the sun, there's always two things I think about. One is that the sun is eviscerating, incinerating any entities or things that shouldn't be in my field. And I receive the intel from the sun, because we're talking about, cosmic intelligence. It's coming from the source of the source of the source. And it's not vitamin D. When people say, "Oh, I'm going to go get my vitamin D," or "I'm too little vitamin D, I need to spend more time in the sun," I'm like, okay, you've been in the matrix too long. They'll tell you it's for vitamin D, and they'll tell you, of course, to cover your skin and everything with all this toxic SPF stuff as well. When, by the way, just on a note on that, people should know that the natural oils have their own SPF, and essential oil of carrot, for example, it has an SPF of over 25. So you can make a coconut oil mixture and a few drops of carrot oil, and you've got a decent SPF. Now, it's not to say use the sun, but the point is that's intel. That's so important. So if we want to make our castle strong, our kingdom strong again, we need to go about the business of getting rid of all these false codes and false programmings. And only then can the structure become sovereign and empowered again. But you were talking about the Disney thing. Sorry, and so it makes sense. Disney Castle, right? Which I think was fashioned after a very, very dark castle in Germany, where some really, let's say, nefarious stuff tends to go down. So there's no mistakes in that whole thing. And if you flip Disney over, you can see the mirror of it. Remember, everything's in versions. You get the word wicked, which is pretty wicked. There's a lot of stuff going on there, but the fairy tales. So this is why I was telling you the 0 to 6, 0 to 7, bringing this up, because if we're watching all these romance codes, all this, what love should look like, and how we should be swept off our feet, and how, what beauty should look like, and all this stuff, then, we want to be a Disney princess, and we want, Aladdin or, whoever the prince of the day is to sweep us off our feet. And then we're going to look for that commodity so that, we can fulfill that experience that we're told that we should have, because that's the ultimate experience. And so there's those kinds of stories, actually, if they're not, let's say, balanced out with truth, with understanding, they can really weaken us and get us into patterns of what the matrix us has been trained to desire, as opposed to what the core in us would really desire and choose in a partner, in any number of things. But that romance program is really, and then the rom-coms come along, of course, and the TV shows and all this, it just goes on and on and on until we
And what does it teach us? It teaches us that love is outside of ourselves, that we have to seek it outside of ourselves instead of look within. So the program it becomes deep, and it causes so much pain in our life, because you can't find it. It doesn't actually exist.
And that's the thing. When they bring us in and want to play with our power, take our power from us, there's the commoditization, and in the connection, the two sides of the same coin, or how can I put this? Commoditizing oneself and not believing that one's satisfaction comes from within, that comes from the same place. And that is at the core of all addiction, that seeking outside of self. And then you're really finished. And then your whole rest of your life, you're going to be seeking outside. And because you're doing so, you're going to always be paying a very high price for doing that. You're going to be missing out on your own internal gold. And you're always going to need to have a little bit more of whatever it is you're seeking, because the way these addiction patterns work in the brain with neurotransmitters, you always need a little bit more of the substance to get the same high or the same satisfaction that you had before. So then you basically spend a life in addiction. And most people have multiple addictions. They think, oh, well, maybe one stands out. I would say most people have 4 or 5 addictions at least.
Yeah. And then they've also social media knows how to track what we're even remotely looking at to feed that addiction. So it's become crazy. But let's talk about even, sugar. You've talked about cereals, and how can we perceive these sugary cereals even as food, but somehow it's been programmed in that they are.
Yeah. I think the way, okay, so that, again, it's that commoditization, that Disney thing, and that TV, when the kids, I mean, if a kid is going to watch commercials and the TV is actually literally programming them, it's a TV program, and they're, and that's the channel it's coming through to their channel. It's like, we know we have a channel to God. Well, this is like our channel to the program. And they know how there's in detailed, obviously we know this. So there's the marketers and the brain, those who understand how the brain operates. They know the colors to choose. They know the number of times the screen should flicker, the amount of action, all these things that will compel somebody to watch. And then once they've gotten in, which is not hard to do, they're in, and then they're selling this thing, and then suddenly the child just wants what's on the TV because I remember watching and seeing these cereals and being like, whoa. And then there's this gift inside, there's a present treasure, which leads to the reward concept of addiction. So we have the dopamine drop, and then we've got the pathways, and then we have this reward that comes. So the addiction isn't satiated until you have the reward. And for kids, I think there's this sense of the reward is even just having that box that was on the TV that seems unattainable, attained. Well, that's a satisfaction, something that looks really pretty out there in the world, and wow, it's on TV, and now it's on my kitchen counter. And on top of that, I get another reward, ding, dopamine drop, by finding the present inside, So there's that.
Yeah. And just becoming aware of these things is so empowering. Let's look at sexuality from a very young age, and then into our teenage years when, we think we need to look a certain way to be accepted, and the feeling of being an outcast when you're not that. Just
it's heavy.
It's heavy, yeah.
I think first of all, it's like one of the most torturous things the Matrix does is it creates this very narrow bandwidth of what's attractive, and that they do this on purpose. So what's chosen is the unattainable. This is crazy making stuff. I mean, mind-bendingly crazy making. So let's take this very narrow window of what's absolutely unattainable. Very skinny, very tall, very blonde, very perfect. Now, it's not to say that everybody's not perfect, but this is what is now defined as perfection. So by the definition, Matrix definition of perfection, this is what you need to be in order to have value, in order for your commodity to be worth something. So then what do? We start scrambling to try to meet that level of perfection so that we can feel like we have value. And that, of course, is, it's totally inverted. We should obviously never have this concept, but yet we do. It seems obvious when we talk about it, especially as mothers, we would never want our daughters to feel this way. But I can tell you, if someone checks out my daughter's Instagram account, it's very clear that, that this is not the message that she got. Maybe I came to it too late in the game. I mean, it's just, but it's, and of course I was so deep in that program. I was born in Los Angeles in 1975, and my parents were in the entertainment business, and it was just, the heyday of Beverly Hills and shopping in the 80s and the whole thing. And of course I had the most exquisitely beautiful mother, and she was perfect, and she expected me to be perfect, not because she was, mean about it or anything, but she just assumed that, she would have a perfectly beautiful daughter with long skinny legs and, and all this. And I didn't, I had kind of log-like legs, and if I ate normally, I didn't, I didn't quite measure up to that expectation. But I say that because with all that shopping, all that programming that's being laid in, you don't have much energy for anything else, even though, if we need to if we're trying to really commoditize ourselves well, we're going to succeed in every area of unattainability that the matrix drives us to. So we will find that energy somehow, but it will be at the expense of our energy reserves, and we'll be doing it on adrenaline. We'll be living on adrenaline, trying to attain all that. And ultimately, what will we be left with? We will have commoditized ourselves, sold ourselves out to, whether it's a corporation or a man or a woman or, you know, a social network or something, a kind of a social group. And we will basically have gotten what we signed up for. So our life will reflect what our ambition was, and it will be empty, but we may have done that, and it may seem a success for a moment, but ultimately we'll never be satisfied, we'll never be happy. We will feel, we will be powerless.
Yeah. I immediately think of two situations in my life. I love dancing, but I was pretty short, and I would never be, you know, the typical ballet dancer that's tall, skinny, and just, you know, seeing those girls all around you gave you this feeling of not good enough, and it was the perceived perfection. And then the whole, like, I grew up in fashion, so you felt like you needed something new every week at least, you know, you had to be on the latest fashion, the latest look, the latest. And thinking about that as a teenager and how it was like, now that you see it, you know, it's completely programmed in.
Yeah. It's the pressure. It's so much pressure. And I mean, I know that men feel a huge amount of pressure in other areas, but, and, you know, also to agree, more so in very modern times, in the last sort of decade and a half, with the sort of advent of the metrosexual. But, you know, guys have become very, very focused on their looks and stuff, but, which is also actually, if I may, a part of the matrix desire to neuter both genders. So let's get men super obsessed with their looks, and they'll be feminized, you know, as much as let's get women on this high horse about feminism, which is a false sense of feminism, this desire to be on the same playing field with a man, you know, when it's also a defeminization. But everyone's caught up, you know, in this being a good thing because we're equal now. No, yes, we're equally neutered. We're equally powerless now. You know, that's how we're equal.
Exactly. Yes. And instead of embracing who we truly are, like as feminine, and just loving every aspect of yourself.
Yeah, and that's about the sacredness. So we need to, in order to see the value of what we are, we need to go back to figure out what is it that they were trying to take from us. When I say they, there is a they. It's the matrix entity. So, you know, there's a great movie called They Live. Have you heard this movie? They Live. It's an incredible movie. Anyway, it's how we're all like, you put on the glasses and you see what's really happening, how you're sold to, and everything, and the whole matrix construct. It's from the 80s. It's a great old film that gives you insight. So anyone listening, check out They Live. But so what is this that they wanted to take from us? What were they so intimidated by? What is it that's so desirable and feeds them with so much power? Well, it's the substance of life. And that is sacred. That is so sacred. So if we knew how to set our hierarchy right, and realize that was so sacred, and that was the prize, that was the value, the force of life, the substance of life, this creative power, we would then make that the focus. We would then protect it, because what do we do with things that we value? You know, we don't take our beautiful diamond jewelry and just kind of toss it around somewhere. You know, when you really value something, truly, not just like hypothetically, but truly, you really protect it. You know, you have your child, you have your beautiful home, you have your special thing, whatever it is, you know, we know what we value by what we do with that which we, let's say, possess in loose terms. So that which you truly value, take care of. So if we were to go back to that, then we would have a life that was built around caring for that substance of life. And you would not see anything that goes on the way it does today, because whether it's, you know, what we'd be eating, if we were protecting our forces of life, we would only be adding a force of life to the force of life. Anything that would possibly have an effect of draining it or obstructing flow, or anything that would mess with the mechanics of the flow of life, would have no place, would be seen as so unappealing or so bizarre to even dream of. And yet everything in the matrix world is anti-energetic drain, because siphons our power, takes away, makes us weaker. So when we get to the actual sort of centermost point, the quintessence of what is powerful, we find the substance of life, and we see why they want it so much.
Yeah. And through pain and fear, it's you remain disabled and feeding. It's, I was thinking too about how our whole educational system teaches us to be something that keeps us a cog in the wheel, in the rat race of providing money to something else. And if you're the ultimate matrix contriver, you're the head of that. So in education, you try to get yourself into the one that markets to the rest, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, like my own girls are at the point of going to university, and and I see all these things. I'm like, will I drive them into this tunnel of becoming something so that they can feed this matrix, or do I back up and let them choose from their own heart? And then, that's a scary thing, because then are you sure you'll get money? And are you sure? So all the fears come in from the matrix. And how do you,
oh gosh, look, I think I came, all the knowledge that I had about, like, all my sort of nutritional cleansing, even cleansing the emotional field, the mental field, all this stuff was with me when the kids were little, when my big kids were little. But my awareness of the matrix construct didn't come online until maybe a few years ago. So the big ones are, I don't know what I do right now at this point with them, but my eldest just went to the university. She's 20, and my son is turning 18 in a few weeks. I think they're going to have to they're going to have to see the world unfold before them with their own sort of, alpha brainwave attention to it. And hopefully they'll make sense of it, and they'll kind of come back and say, Mom, I kind of maybe beginning to see what you're talking about. Maybe that would be a dream come true for me. We'll see if that happens. But the little one who's turning 9 in a few months, she's 8.5. She gets it. Like I wouldn't say she gets it completely, but I'm able to give her a perspective of, I'm able to give her this perspective, this matrix understanding perspective, without like drilling into her, being too forceful about it. So I think she'll be able to walk both worlds. But I think if they can grasp their own intrinsic value, and they can see why it's a value, and why they don't want to desecrate their kingdom or make their kingdom vulnerable to be taken over, and they can pursue careers in things like, for example, what you're doing with homeopathy, and to provide a service to the world that is going to be valuable and needed once everything becomes clear, and even in the transition, because people are still aware of things like homeopathy and craniosacral work and all these, and they might be musicians, they might or athletes, and other things. There's still, if it's not twisted in the matrix world, could still keep them in integrity, say, and not have to compromise. And then I think I think we do our kids a huge favor if we can help them see how the anti-energetic forces work, and help them find a path that enables them to be of service, to have money in the monetary economy, so long as we're still in it, which I hope won't last too much longer. And I know if people are sort of not aware of how that can't be, it actually is a matrix construct. The monetary system is a matrix construct. It's actually, the whole debt system is, it's not even, I don't want to say too much about that now, but it's something that needs to go, let's say. And I think if things will turn right in the world, and I do think they will, it's something that we'll see a big shift in. So it's going to be a skill to be, as Jesus said, to be in the world and not of the world. Really to grasp that, to really not be a product of the matrix construct. But it's a transition. It's a process. It's like, if you have someone come in to see you and they've chronic and acute illness, and they have, for decades, that you have a vision for how you'll be able to remediate that and what they will be like once they've, healed all of their issues and balanced their body, but they have to go through that transition. So, we're at various stages of that transition. All of us are, and I'm still getting myself out of the matrix. But the beauty of it is that I see it. I know what I'm doing. I'm aware. And so I'm saving my life. I'm saving my soul, because basically when we talk about the power and the source of life and the substance of life, it is soul force. And so as we take our energy, our power back, if you imagine that you've got this little ball of soul that's around you, it gets a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger and a little fuller and a little thicker and a little bit richer and a little more integrity to it. And that's what we're able to do as we transition out. So we don't have to be out tomorrow. We just have to be getting that soul force back from the matrix, because we're no longer buying into it. And the more we do that, the more out we are. It's just like with tissue cleansing and transitioning with that. You get the first 2-3 weeks in, you feel so much better. But 3 years in, you are a completely transformed person.
Yeah, it's just becoming aware. And even to be aware that we are programmed for the first years of our life, that our brain is unconscious. 95% of our brain is unconscious. So we take in all the information and have no way of choosing what is right or wrong. And so just becoming aware of a lot of what we're carrying is a program, and that it doesn't have the depth or strength that we have given it. It's, it's imagined, it's perceived. Let's look at female sexuality. I love when you talk about that, because it's so empowering just to be aware of it.
Okay. Well, first of all, we have to think of both genders in terms of the sacred gender. So the sacred feminine, the sacred masculine. And then immediately we bring honor to ourselves, to the expression of that. And so, the fact that I am born into a woman's body means that I need to honor the things that a woman is sort of, let's say, inclined to, the gifts a woman brings. So if I'm born as soil, let me be the best soil I can be. If I'm born as sun or sky, let me be the best sun or sky I can be. And one of the reasons I have a real problem with, with sort of manipulating gender is because, again, it takes us out of it. It's not actually a listening, a true inner listening to what the soul in that gender, be that being, wants. It's a seeking outside. If we were fulfilling that soul force, that would be different. But it's manipulation. It's external manipulation. So it's a difficult subject matter. But I also feel like at a certain point, I feel like I need to say something about it, because I do feel that it's a desecration of that soul's embodiment, and it only feeds the objectification that the matrix wants us to buy into. So if it's a purely physical thing and it's purely driven by a sexual desire, then it's a misuse of sexual energy. And I know a lot of people have a hard time with that, but for what it's worth, it all does connect, and it's not keeping the life, the force of, it's not putting the force of life first. It's putting the objectification and sensual pleasure first. And that's what the matrix does. It inverts everything. So where we should be having our orgasms first here in the pineal gland, and having see what the base chakra sexual pleasure zone is a physical embodiment of the very, very exquisite orgasmic forces of life. So Wilhelm Reich talks about the orgone. Orgone is that substance of life from which life springs. So we have it in we have it in our head center. We have it here where we express. I mean, the exquisiteness of harmony and the voice. We've all experienced that, listening to it, if not, expressing it ourselves. The orgasm of the heart. If you haven't had an orgasm of the heart, to anyone who's listening, go have that experience before you go have an orgasm, in your base chakra again, because that has to happen first. Otherwise, you're missing out on what it means to be human. And of course we are, because we're trained to be gratified by the sensuality of the base chakra. And there's nothing wrong with that if it's starting from above. But if it's inverted, again, that's how the matrix works, inverts everything, then you'll never get the higher levels of connection, and you'll be driven out of yourself into sexual pleasure, into erogenous experiences, because that will become an addiction. It'll become an external addiction. Anything external will always become an addiction. The degree to which it's perverted is the degree to which it will become an even more extreme addiction, in the same way that the more acidic a substance is, the more addictive it will become. So, a cantaloupe is not going to be as addictive as tobacco. Tobacco will not be as addictive as cocaine, etc. So, all of these things, an inorganically grown cantaloupe will have too much sugar in it, and may be inclined to be fungal, and it's not necessarily an ideal food. So people often have a hard time understanding that the fruit isn't necessarily an ideal food in certain bodies, and because of the way it's grown and because it's inclined to fungus. And this because if you leave it out, it'll become fungus ridden very quickly, whereas if you were to leave out leafy green vegetables, it won't. But see, as above, so below. So all of these things, I know it seems like I'm trying to make connections here that are, will enable your whole life to line up with this very, again, quintessential principle of how life works, with what's acidic, and how acidity becomes addictive on every level. So we desecrate the substance of life when our aim is for experiential gratification. It's not to say that it can never happen, but it can't happen very often if one is going to be in alignment. It's not to say that you can't join with another highly conscious being and have a sacred sexual union that blows your socks off. It will be even more mind-blowing when you have the connection with the creator in the pineal gland in the center of the head, and when you have that connection with that love partner that begins in the heart. Have that heart orgasm first on your own with yourself, then with your love partner. And if you don't have that love orgasm with the other person, you really shouldn't be having sexual union with them. And I know that, again, maybe hard to hear for people, but it's the tough truth.
Yeah, and having teenagers, I'm aware of rap music right now, and I'm not the type to just turn it off. I'll experience it with them. And we even have conversations, about how a lot of teenagers are, like, the program is to have multiple sexual partners. Just, it's like is it an addiction? And I do talk to them about, this sacred connection, how important it is, but it is definitely being programmed out right now, and it's a little bit scary.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing we have to talk to our kids about as often as possible, even if we sound like broken records. And I always preface it by saying, I know you guys don't want to hear this, but I'm going to say it anyway, and just indulge me, because I don't ask for a lot, but please. And then I won't say anything about it for a while. Just putting it out there again, because basically this is, if they're after our power, we have the manifestation of that power there, and when it's activated sexually, it's a drain, it's a loss if it's not done from a higher place. If it's done from a higher place, it's a creative expression, and not only a creative expression, it's a creative event. In fact, the way I understand it, I'm not an expert in this area, but I've understood it that when two conscious people come together in sacred union, the sexual event is actually a manifestation event. It's a manifestation opportunity process. So whatever is in your mind, whatever is, whatever your hopes and dreams are, wherever your consciousness is, when you join together, will come about in your life. And it can be done from obviously a conscious place or an unconscious place, and that you shouldn't be messing with sexual energy unless you're actually wielding it, using it in a constructive way. Otherwise, the fallout, you won't know where it came from, but the negative fallout will be there. And, I think, there's plenty of evidence of that in our world. But that's also why pornography is another way the Matrix gets that energy. And it doesn't matter for the Matrix, there's a substance called loosh. Have you heard of loosh?
I have, yeah.
Okay, so loosh is like the energy that comes out when you're in a lot of fear or a lot of lust, those are the strongest emotions I can imagine now, but or in intense anger. So really dysfunctional anger, compulsions and fear and lust. And they love this. It's like they drink it up, the loosh, the matrix energy, that the entities drink it up. And the more they're fed this, the more they want it, because of course it's addictive for them too. So they have to keep us in more states of lust and fear and stress and compulsion and all this stuff in order to procure for them, or for them to harvest the amount of loosh they now need to have the same experience. So one thing to think about is, I'll speak for myself. I don't want to give them any more, and one great way to prevent, or to just be a great force for good in the world, is to not have resentments and dysfunctional anger and lust and all this stuff. And even when you have, it's a great way to stop feelings of just negativity around issues you have with people, or even dramas or things you would normally feed because you felt entitled to, or you couldn't let go of things. Just remember that by doing that, by indulging those emotions, you're putting loosh out there. And that was a great way for me to be like, you know what? I don't care if I could spend half a day, just being upset about this thing that happened. I can't do that. I have a responsibility not to let loosh out into the world.
Exactly.
It gets you to just be really responsible with your energy and with your thoughts and everything, because the thoughts, of course, are going to create it too. Because remember, the Matrix was created because of the central primary law of the universe, let's say the natural world, to the extent that we understand it, is the law of mentalism. Law of mentalism means so mentalism is mind, which means thoughts. So thought forms have a structure and form, and they will build on each other. So that creates the network, and that's what creates the web that we get stuck in. So the matrix is a field of thoughts, a mind field, a literal, not a mind field, M-I-N-E, but a M-I-N-D field. And that's why it is this, and that's why it's so easy to create this inversion, because the law of mentalism is a universal concept, and it should be a great creative force that expands. But the entities that want to feed off of life because they don't have their own, they take that concept, they invert it, make it a negative thing. It works, and they trap us like a bear trap, and then suck us dry.
Yeah. So it's being aware too that we're more than what we see, and that there is more out there than what we're aware of.
Yes. All this entity. Yeah. That's what's so crazy. If we could actually put the lenses on that enabled us to see what was actually around us and what we were actually letting out of ourselves. In fact, it used to bug me, I won't get the biblical quote right, but I think there was some point where Jesus said, I had a lot of sort of Sunday school growing up. It's not that I'm a happy clapper or something. It was put into me. A big part of my matrix upbringing was a lot of church. But this idea that it's not so much, because I think it was something where there was an argument where the Sadducees or the Pharisees or some of these C's were like, how can you eat that? And then Jesus was like, well, it's not about what you put inside. It's about what comes out of you and comes off of you. And that used to annoy me because I'd be like, of course it's what you put inside. It's of course, how can you say that? Jesus, how can you say that? And then, but I think it wasn't to write off, what you put inside, but it's to spotlight the fact that what comes out of you makes such a big impact on the world. So, which also brings us back to the concept. So many people want to go out and save the world, but their own being is so out of order. Yeah. So, because it's so much easier to fix somebody else than to fix ourselves, to clean somebody else's closet than to organize our own. This is where this comes in. It's so critical.
Yeah. So if we want to change the world, it has to start from within.
Yeah. And catching what comes off of you, knowing that you're programmed and conditioned to feed your lowest emotions, your most dysfunctional emotions, because they give the matrix a lot of good loosh.
Yeah. I watched Thrive 2 recently, and they're starting to talk about the unified field. Scientists like Nassim Haramein, how everything's a fractal and how Earth is a fractal and our universe is a fractal within fractal and how everything's connected. But when we talk about loosh and giving off this energy and being part of this trap or matrix today, it's like we need to get our head around the fact that we're more than planet Earth, and that there's, beings that see us as a commodity. It's, it's big. It's, and it's hard to understand and hard to see, but I think we just have to be aware of it.
Well, I love, actually it's perfect that you say this because it makes me think about the network of life and how we talk about the matrix being the inverse of the network of life. So if you think of the network of life being the law of mentalism used in the creative, with the creative forces, the forces of good, the source energy, intel. And you have, if anyone, can just imagine that there are actually all these threads connecting. So, when we see soil in a tree, I'm looking out my window now, there's beautiful soil and tree and lemons on the trees and stuff. It's not just that. It's all these connective threads. So they're feeding each other. They're conducting energy. So, for example, tonight to make my juice, I'll go and harvest my arugula and various vegetables, and I want to make that juice as soon as I can after I've clipped them off. I sometimes feel a little bad because I feel like that's also a little bit of like taking energy. But anyway, the point is that the leaves, the stems, everything is rich with the force of the earth, the vibration of coming up from the center of the earth into this, these arugula leaves, and that's pulsating through. So we're seeing things too much of a black and white kind of context because we've been trained to see that way. Of course, I think if we were trained differently, we would see these threads of light of life. And in fact, there are certain, say plant medicines that enable you to see them. I'm not, I don't want to get that. That's another conversation for another day, but they can be helpful in giving you an actual view of these, like you can see in the clouds and you see the connections, all the things happening in the sky, and it's not chemtrails, so, but what you have with the matrix, which makes it so compelling, is that the network is there, and the matrix comes in and it cuts these nets, these threads, these beautiful threads conducting the force of life. We don't see it happening, but it's doing it. So for example, even the smallest difference of me being in union with my vegetable garden and the juice that's going into me coming from my vegetable garden versus buying it in a store in a plastic bag, coming on a truck, maybe being grown in the wrong temperature, whatever it is, being put into refrigeration and all these things. And by the time it comes, there's no conductivity anymore. It's green, but there's no life flowing through it. It's not to say that you shouldn't do that. It's all transitional. And of course, I still do that from time to time. But the point is that the second we disconnect from nature, we then are getting less power. We're having less conductivity, and we then become dependent on the matrix for our supply. And that's something that's going to take some time to turn around. But when we can start to recognize that anywhere we have dependency on the matrix for our supply is where we are going to lose power and have our network of life broken up. But we're going to restore this. We're going to pluck the matrix. It's like having, I don't know, maybe like gum stuck in your hair, and you got to get the gum out of your hair, and with as little damage to your hair as possible. But there might be some damage. But you know what happens once the gum comes out? A little damage. The hair is going to come back together even stronger. It's all going to come back, without the gum. It's hard work. It's sticky. It's icky. But we can't walk around with gum in our hair.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think we just need to realize too how little we need, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, yes. And that's also the thing. That's a great litmus test for how far we come, because the fewer needs we have and the greater sense of ease without any external outreach or need.
Yeah. One of the things I often chuckle about is even, we've been programmed to think we have to go to the gym to work out. Meanwhile, we've been programmed to think we need to sit on a chair and, use a keyboard. But in reality, if we were more part of the earth, and like I often have to muck stalls, and that is a workout. Just looking after horses and gardening is activity and a workout. So why have we been so trained to go somewhere, where you can do it in your own home? You can do yoga in your own home. You can do yoga while you clean. I'm just throwing that out there.
Oh, no. Because what the matrix loves and thrives on is extremes. So unfortunately, in order to, this is where it gets kind of complicated though, because here's a lifestyle of extreme sedentary kind of activity, which is like an oxymoron. But study all day in a chair, work all day in a cubicle. If you're going to transport yourself, you're sitting in a car or an airplane or whatever it is, you're so sedentary that you have to go blast it out for an hour in the gym, versus a lifestyle of moving in beautiful dynamic ways, plus not consuming things that would interfere with and slow you down and weigh you down. So yeah, that's how it works. And it also works into that kind of pendulum swinging, and also in terms of putting everything has to be at odds and everything is black and white. So if it's not this, it's this. Well, no, actually, it's neither one of these things. And that's where it catches people. And that's why we have all these problems with people who are very matrix minded, ruining friendships over this time period, because they refuse to see that there may be something else going on. And it's interesting because the people who see that there's something else going on would never reject the people who don't see it. And that's really interesting to me. Do you find that?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
The open-minded people don't reject, but the closed-minded people do reject.
Yeah. Well, just being aware too of your own, I often find you can't speak your truth. And what happens is people hear certain things that really trigger them, and which creates chaos instead of seeing everything. But yeah,
that's so exactly. Yes. I get you. Yes. And it's their blind spots. It's those shadow parts that they're just not aware of. And we can use those. See, I love those. I love it when I find those in myself. And I encourage my clients to get excited when they find their weaknesses, because that's exactly where the matrix is going to get in. That's where you've been used and siphoned, and just it's a treasure when you identify those. And we should be identifying many of them every day, and we should be apologizing many times a day too, because wow, I see something I didn't see before. I behaved this way because I didn't see this. It's not. It doesn't make us less. It doesn't make us inferior. Or superior. It just it means that we're rectifying things that we couldn't, that we were living in a state of greater weakness when we didn't identify them.
Yeah, exactly. So yes, and I had another vision come while you were talking too, is, how we think we have to have everything look perfect and be perfect. And I often laugh and say, well, where's the bus? Like, nobody really cares. We only think they do. We've been programmed to think they do.
Yeah.
So we need so much less than we think we need. And
yeah, it's all that fear, that sense of, if I don't measure up, then I'm not going to be worth anything. And my commodity on the, on the stock exchange of my community or whatever it is going to plummet, and I'm going to have nothing.
yeah.
That's this whole cycle.
Yeah. Yeah. So interesting. And I just wanted to talk and then we'll finish up, but how we were brought up to have short skirts and, look sexy, and in order to get the prize. But what is the prize,
Yeah.
Which is,
So good. Because then we wind up, if we sell ourselves, we're going to sell ourselves to somebody who was buying what we were selling, because they were programmed to buy what we were selling, which means they were objectifying us. So we're going to wind up with somebody who objectified us, not who loved us. And we're going to wind up with someone we objectified who we didn't love. And that's not a good recipe for partnership or bringing children into the world.
No. So what should we do instead?
Well, I guess we have to identify that program, and as we deprogram it as we override it. So as we catch ourselves thinking that way, allowing ourselves to be treated that way. The hard thing is, once you identify your own value and that of others, and you start operating that way, then you can't actually be with someone who doesn't actually value you anymore. That's too great a disservice to yourself. If you're mistreated, you're not held sacred. But you also have to then make sure that you're holding everybody else as sacred as you expect yourself to be taken. But that's where relationships have to disintegrate, or have to move on, have to evolve, either together and the other person gets it or not, because otherwise it's tricky, because it's the most grueling. I speak from experience. It's the most grueling experience of all to have to take a family apart because because it's not functioning in the sacred. And that's a very personal decision everyone will have to make for themselves. But while you're in the space while a person's in the space of contemplation and learning to value themselves and learning to value others in a real way, as opposed to commoditizing and having transactional relationships, you heal and you gain strength, you gain perspective, and it's primarily about you setting yourself right and not trying to change anybody else. If they pick up on it, great, but like to not fall into the trap of, now I understand that everything's sacred, and so why aren't you treating me, it's all internal, because the second you get it right, you won't want to be around anything that isn't holding you sacred anymore. So I guess it's just like the natural, how do we do it? We see it and we slowly integrate it, and we can't be afraid of what the ultimate result is going to be, or the interim result. Because the ultimate result will be that our soul we do it for our soul, we do it for the soul's journey, and we do it because it's the right thing to do. And so the ultimate outcome is going to be positive. If there's events that don't feel nice along the way, that's just part of the transition. And yes, it's really hard, and my heart goes out to anyone who has hardship in that process. But you can't really avoid it. It's like if you're having a colonic and there's a lot of angry gas has to leave in order for you to feel better. And that's not a nice process, but the ultimate effect is you're going to be filled with more life force than you ever were before. So it's removing obstruction and reconnecting threads where they were broken, it takes, time and attention and hard work and sometimes a lot of pain. But if you're doing it right, on the other side of that pain is going to be fulfillment and satisfaction.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's connecting to your own heart and trusting that it's all going to work out. I remember going through a really painful time, and just that connection to my heart. And you can't see through the fog at all, but I would get this flush of love energy, just so calming, and you would know that everything was going to be okay.
It would, Joseph Campbell talks about this in The Hero with 1,000 Faces. The whole hero's journey, the most amazing part about it is that when you make the decision to take on the journey that needs to be done, despite how daunting it is, there is this supernatural help that arrives on the scene. And I think it's just that, again, the things that we can't see, we were talking about, there's these angelic forces that we can't see, these supporting forces, these legions that are around probably each one of us, that when we do the right thing, it's like, they're like, yes, she's doing it. All right. What's, and the surprise help that comes along is not what you'd expect at all. But it does the trick, and it enables you to get to the next step and get beyond the threshold and triumph in this way. And even though every step along the way, you don't know if it's going to happen or what's going to happen, there is this what did I say? The magical help that is just there. So, and I guess that's what you call faith. I've always preferred the concept of experiential faith over blind faith. So I like to say, well, you don't have to have faith in the fact that, that some of these things that we know that we work with work, because when you experience it, it's not going to be hypothetical, theoretical, like, oh, I took this pill, I think it's working. I took this vitamin, I think, no, this actually, you're going to viscerally know. And, and that's experiential faith. And, but there is a pattern in life that when you do the courageous, right, path of greatest resistance thing, as opposed to the easy thing, the forces of goodness smile on that. And there is help, there's aid that comes your way.
Yeah. It's undeniable.
Yeah.
I felt it. You felt it. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's happened. It's actually, and that's why my faith now is experiential in that regard. But until I had to walk across the threshold with that sense of not knowing, it was a leap of faith, but it was a sense of what else can be done. Like, it's when you know that the alternative is no way to live, or that the alternative has consistently produced pain, you eventually have to make another choice, whatever the situation is. Yeah.
And then that you do feel that support from the universe or whatever, you say it very well.
Okay.
Thank you, Natalia. So how do people get in touch with you if they want to get in touch and learn more from you, or just give us some contacts?
Yeah, thank you. Okay. So the website, there is detoxtheworld.com, and we also have nataliarose.com. So that's a great way to contact me. Also on Facebook Messenger is good. I'm on there. And yeah, I think those are probably the 2 or 3 best ways: detoxtheworld.com, nataliarose.com, and Facebook Messenger.
Great. I encourage everyone out there to get in contact with Natalia. And thank you so much for sharing this knowledge with us today, Natalia. I acknowledge this deep knowing that you have, and I'm really grateful that you came to share it.
Wow, Jayne, thank you. I feel the same way about you. And it was a joy to have this dialogue and explore this territory with you. It was truly, truly a great pleasure. Thank you.
And so for everyone out there, don't forget, don't give away your power to anyone else. Just go be you and be the wave.